The war had taken everything from humanity. 11 years of fighting had left the once proud human fleet in ruins. Colony after colony had fallen to the Dominion, a powerful alliance of 6 alien species who had decided that humans did not deserve to exist among the stars. Over 40 worlds had been conquered. Billions had died. Earth itself prepared for an invasion that seemed impossible to stop. In the darkest hour of human history, hope came from an unexpected place. Deep beneath the frozen surface of Titan, Saturn's largest moon, a secret shipyard had been working for 17 years. The project had consumed resources from 3 entire solar systems. Thousands of the best engineers, scientists, and builders had dedicated their lives to creating something that had never existed before. They called it the USS, and it was not just a warship. It was the embodiment of human desperation and human genius combined into a single vessel. Captain Daniel Carter received his orders on a cold morning in the underground facility. He was 52 years old, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death. The war had taken his wife and his son during the fall of New Geneva, a beautiful colony world that had burned from orbit. He had watched the footage of the attack hundreds of times. He had memorized every detail, and he had promised himself that he would make the enemy pay for what they had done. The admiral who gave him the orders was brief. Hunt the enemy, show no mercy. There would be no support, no backup, and no rescue if things went wrong. This was a mission of pure destruction, and Daniel Carter was the perfect man to lead it. His crew had been selected with great care. 400 men and women, each one a survivor of some terrible loss. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were people who had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. Commander Lisa Morgan became his executive officer. She was 45 years old, tall and lean, with short brown hair and a scar that ran down the left side of her face. She had escaped the massacre at Station, where she had watched her entire command die in a matter of hours. They had boarded the station and killed everyone they found. Lisa had survived by hiding in a maintenance shaft for 3 days, listening to the screams of her friends and colleagues. When rescue finally came, she was the only one left alive. Chief Engineer Brooks was a quiet man of 38 who rarely smiled. His of New Portland had been one of the first to fall. They had not bothered to invade. They had simply positioned their ships in orbit and fired until the surface was nothing but glass and ash. Had been off-world at the time, serving on a transport ship. He had watched his planet die from space, unable to do anything to stop it. Every member of his family, every friend he had ever known, had perished in those flames. Weapons Officer Pierce was the youngest of the senior staff at 31. She had served in the ground forces during the defense of Kelvin Prime. Her battalion of 800 soldiers had held their position for 9 days against overwhelming enemy forces. When the evacuation order finally came, she was the only one who made it to the transport. The others had stayed behind to buy time. She still heard their voices in her dreams, telling her to run, to survive, to remember them. These were the people who would crew the broken souls forged into instruments of war. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering. It measured nearly 2 kilometers in length, painted in a black so deep that it seemed to absorb all light. Its hull was covered in advanced stealth materials that made it invisible to every known form of detection. Radar, thermal sensors, gravitational scanners, nothing could find the unless it wanted to be found. But the true terror of the ship lay in its primary weapon system. The engineers called it the Cascade Array. It did not fire missiles or energy beams like conventional weapons. Instead, it generated a field that disrupted the bonds holding matter together at the molecular level. Anything caught in that field simply ceased to exist, breaking apart into atoms that scattered into the void. There was no explosion, no debris, no survivors, just silence and empty space where a ship had once been. Daniel walked through the corridors of his new command on the morning of departure. The crew stood at their stations, ready and waiting. He saw the same look in every pair of eyes: cold determination, quiet rage, a hunger for justice that bordered on something darker. He reached the bridge and took his seat in the captain's chair. Lisa stood beside him, a data pad in her hands showing their first target coordinates. His voice came through the internal communications, reporting that the engines were ready for departure, confirmed that all weapon systems were online and functioning. Daniel looked at the main, which showed the dark interior of the launch bay. Beyond those doors lay the cold emptiness of space. Beyond that lay the enemy. He thought of his wife. Her name had been, and she had loved to paint landscapes of the worlds they visited together. He thought of his son, who had been 12 years old and had dreamed of becoming a pilot. They were gone now, along with so many others. Their memory demanded action. Their loss demanded payment. He gave the order to launch. The rose from Titan's surface without ceremony or announcement. No broadcast celebrated its departure. No crowds gathered to watch it leave. The ship simply emerged from the frozen moon and accelerated into the darkness, its stealth systems engaging automatically. Within minutes, it had vanished from every sensor in the solar system. The High Council, meeting in their grand chamber on there, had no idea what was coming for them. They were busy planning the final invasion of Earth, discussing how they would divide the conquered human territories among themselves. They laughed at the weakness of their enemies. They boasted of their inevitable victory. They did not know that a ghost was moving through the void. A ghost crewed by 400 humans who had lost everything and feared nothing. A ghost carrying weapons that could erase their mighty warships as easily as a hand wipes words from a board. The USS had entered the war, and they would soon learn what human wrath truly meant. The supply depot at VII was one of the most important military installations in the entire Dominion. It floated in orbit around a barren planet, a massive structure of metal and glass that stretched across 50 kilometers of space. 18 warships guarded it at all times. Thousands of workers operated its loading bays and storage facilities. Every weapon, every piece of ammunition, every ration pack that fed the Eastern Campaign passed through this station. They arrived in the system 3 weeks after leaving Titan. It had traveled slowly and carefully, avoiding all shipping lanes and patrol routes. Daniel Carter had studied the intelligence reports for hours every day, learning the patterns of enemy movement, understanding their weaknesses. The ship now hung motionless in the shadow of a distant asteroid, completely invisible to the sensors that swept the system every few minutes. On the bridge, the crew watched the holographic display that showed the depot and its guardian fleet. Lisa Morgan stood beside the captain's chair, her arms crossed over her chest. She had not slept well since they left Titan. The dreams still came, filled with screaming and blood and the smell of burning metal, but her voice was steady when she spoke. 18 ships, 12 destroyers, 4 cruisers, 2 carriers. The station itself has defensive batteries on all sides, standard formation. Daniel nodded slowly. He had seen this formation before, many times. They were predictable in their tactics. They believed that overwhelming force was the answer to every problem. They had never faced an enemy they could not see. Brooks reported from the engineering section that all systems were operating at peak efficiency. The Cascade array was charged and ready. The stealth field was holding perfectly. Pierce confirmed that she had targeting solutions for every ship in the enemy formation. Daniel gave the order to move. The glided forward through the darkness, its engines barely whispering. It passed within 1,000 kilometers of a patrol ship and was not detected. It slipped through the gaps in their sensor coverage like water through a net. Within an hour, it had positioned itself directly above the depot, looking down at the enemy fleet like a predator watching its prey. On the main, Daniel could see the ships going about their normal business. Supply transports docked with the station. Patrol vessels moved in lazy circles. The crews had no idea that death was hovering just above them, invisible and patient. Pierce looked at her captain, waiting for the command. Her fingers rested lightly on the weapon's console. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands did not shake. She thought of her fallen comrades on Kelvin Prime. She thought of the soldiers who had died so that she could live. This was for them. Daniel spoke a single word: fire. The cascade array activated. There was no flash of light, no beam of energy, no roar of engines. The weapon simply projected its field onto the nearest cruiser, a massive vessel that had been responsible for the deaths of thousands of humans. The cruiser did not explode. It did not break apart. It simply dissolved. The metal hull lost its cohesion and scattered into a cloud of atoms. The atmosphere inside vented into space, carrying with it the bodies of crew members who were already dead before they knew anything was wrong. Within 3 seconds, the entire ship had ceased to exist. The fleet had no time to react, shifted her targeting and fired again. A second ship vanished, then a third, then a fourth. Alarms began to sound across the remaining vessels. Commanders shouted orders into their communications systems, demanding to know what was happening. But they could see nothing on their sensors. They could detect no enemy. Ships were simply disappearing, erased from existence by an invisible hand. The commander, a seasoned officer named who had fought in dozens of battles, tried to organize a response. He ordered his ships to scatter, to put distance between themselves and whatever was destroying them. But they moved faster than he could think, tracked each fleeing vessel and eliminated them one by one. The battle, if it could even be called a battle, lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, not a single ship remained. The supply depot itself had been torn apart by the cascade array, its massive structure reduced to drifting atoms. The thousands of workers who had operated it were gone. The supplies that had been meant to fuel the invasion of Earth floated uselessly in the void, scattered across millions of kilometers. Commander had managed to send a distress signal during the chaos. It had traveled for exactly 4 seconds before the electronic warfare systems detected and destroyed the transmission. No word of the attack would reach the High Council. No survivor would carry tales of what had happened. Daniel Carter stood on his bridge and looked at the empty space where the depot had been. He felt no joy, no satisfaction, no relief. He felt only the cold weight of duty. This was just the beginning. There were many more targets on the list. Lisa Morgan approached him quietly. Clean sweep. No survivors, no signals. They will not know what happened here for weeks. Daniel nodded. Good, plot a course for our next target. We have work to do. They turned away from the grave it had created and accelerated into the darkness. Its stealth field engaged once more, hiding it from all sensors. It became a ghost again, moving silently through the void, hunting for its next prey. In the weeks that followed, the High Council grew increasingly concerned. Reports from VII had stopped without explanation. Ships sent to investigate found nothing but empty space. There was no debris, no distress beacons, no evidence of what had occurred. It was as if the entire depot had simply ceased to exist. They sent more investigators. They dispatched patrol fleets to search the surrounding systems. They found nothing. The mystery deepened, and with it came fear. Some members of the council suggested that a natural phenomenon was responsible. A black hole, perhaps, or some unknown spatial anomaly. Others whispered darker theories. They spoke of curses and omens, of ancient powers awakening in the void. None of them suspected the truth. None of them imagined that a single human ship could have done this. In their arrogance, they believed that humanity was broken and defeated. They believed that the war was already won. They were wrong. The war was just beginning, and they was hungry for more. Captain Daniel Carter reviewed the reports in his quarters that night. The first strike had been a complete success. The cascade array had performed beyond expectations. His crew had executed their duties flawlessly. He looked at a photograph that sat on his desk. It showed a woman with kind eyes and a boy with a bright smile. and frozen in a moment of happiness that would never come again. "I have started," he whispered to the photograph, "and I will not stop until they have paid for what they did." He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow there would be more death. Tomorrow they would strike again. 3 months passed, and the Dominion began to crumble from within. They had struck 17 times since VII. Each attack followed the same pattern. A military installation or patrol fleet would suddenly go silent. Investigators would find nothing but empty space. No debris, no bodies, no explanation. Ships and stations were simply vanishing, erased from existence as if they had never been. The soldiers began to call the unknown threat the Phantom. They spoke of it in whispers, afraid that saying its name too loudly might summon it. Some believed it was a curse that had awakened in the void, an ancient punishment for their conquest of human worlds. Others thought their gods had turned against them. A few suggested it might be a human weapon, but this idea was dismissed as impossible. The humans were weak, broken, defeated. They could not have created something so terrible. Commander Lisa Morgan stood in the intelligence center of studying the data that flowed across her screens. She had built a complete map of the supply network over the past weeks. She knew their shipping routes, their patrol schedules, their communication protocols. She understood their military structure better than many of their own officers did. She selected each target with surgical precision: supply depots that fed their forces, shipyards that built their warships, communication relays that connected their scattered fleets. Each strike was designed to cause maximum damage while leaving no evidence behind. Cole, the tactical officer, worked beside her. He was a thin man of 40 with sharp eyes and a mind that processed combat data faster than anyone Daniel had ever met. He had spent 20 years in the human fleet before the war began, and he had survived the destruction of 3 different ships. Each time, he had been the only one to escape. He carried that guilt with him always, a weight that drove him to ensure their current mission succeeded. Together, Lisa and refined their attack patterns until they achieved something close to perfection. Each engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. Each engagement ended with total annihilation. They never saw them coming. They never knew what killed them. The psychological effect on the enemy was devastating. Reports began to reach the intelligence section about chaos within the Dominion fleet. Commanders were refusing assignments to sectors where disappearances had occurred. They made excuses, claimed their ships needed repairs, invented emergencies that required their attention elsewhere. Anything to avoid sailing into the void where the Phantom hunted. Crews on several vessels went ordered to patrol the affected regions. Soldiers who had fearlessly conquered human worlds now trembled at the thought of facing an enemy they could not see or understand. Discipline broke down. Fear spread like a disease through the ranks. The 6 species that made up the Dominion began to turn on each other. They accused of incompetence in defending shared territory. They blamed the leadership for provoking whatever force was destroying their ships. Arguments erupted in council chambers. Old rivalries resurfaced. The alliance that had seemed unbreakable now showed cracks that grew wider with each passing week. Daniel Carter watched these developments through intercepted communications and intelligence reports. He sat in his quarters each night, reading the translated transcripts of enemy conversations. He heard their fear. He felt their confusion. He understood their growing desperation. And he felt nothing. The man who had once laughed easily and loved deeply had become something else entirely. The death of his family had hollowed him out, leaving only purpose behind. He existed now for a single reason: to destroy those who had taken everything from him. Every successful strike, every vanishing enemy ship, was another payment on a debt that could never be fully repaid. His crew sensed the change in him. They saw the coldness in his eyes, the mechanical precision of his commands, but they did not judge him. They understood. Many of them had the same transformation. They were no longer ordinary people. They were instruments of vengeance, wielded by a captain who had become vengeance itself. Brooks kept the ship running through sheer force of will. The systems were experimental and often temperamental. The cascade array required constant maintenance. The stealth field generators ran hot and needed regular cooling cycles. The engines had never been designed for this kind of extended operation, but made it work. He slept only 4 hours each night, spending the rest of his time crawling through maintenance tunnels and adjusting power distributions. His hands were permanently stained with lubricant and coolant. His back ached from hours spent in cramped spaces. He did not complain. Every adjustment he made, every system he kept running, helped kill more of the enemy. That was enough. Pierce grew more skilled with each engagement. She had learned the cascade array intimately, understanding its capabilities and limitations better than the engineers who had designed it. She could predict exactly how long each firing cycle would take, how much recovery time the weapon needed between shots. She planned her targeting sequences to maximize efficiency, eliminating as many ships as possible before the enemy could react. She still dreamed of Kelvin Prime. She still heard the voices of her fallen comrades, but now those voices urged her forward instead of haunting her. They cheered with each enemy ship destroyed. They celebrated each victory. She was their instrument now, carrying out the justice they could no longer deliver themselves. The 17th strike hit a shipyard that had been producing a new class of battlecruiser. The facility was heavily guarded, protected by 30 warships and a network of defensive satellites. It took the 4 hours to penetrate the defenses undetected and position itself for attack. When finally opened fire, the destruction was absolute. The shipyard, its workers, its guardian fleet, all vanished in minutes. After the attack, Lisa brought Daniel a report on enemy communications. The High Council was in emergency session. They were debating whether to recall their invasion forces from human space, to pull back and defend their core worlds against the unknown threat. Daniel read the report in silence. Then he set it aside and gave orders for their next target. "We are not finished," he said quietly. "They have not suffered enough." The turn toward the darkness once more. Its engines hummed softly. Its weapons waited hungrily. Somewhere ahead, more enemies waited to die. The High Council met in their grand chamber on their of Prime. The room was ancient, built thousands of years ago when the first achieved. Its walls were covered with carvings depicting great victories. Its ceiling showed maps of conquered territories. For generations, it had been a place of triumph and celebration. Now it was filled with fear. The 6 species that formed the Dominion sat in their designated sections, separated by species but united by the crisis they faced. They themselves occupied the central platform, their gray-skinned bodies rigid with tension. They clustered in the shadows, their multifaceted eyes gleaming with suspicion. And filled the remaining spaces, each group watching the others with growing distrust. High Chancellor rose to address the assembly. He was old for nearly 200 years, and he had led the Dominion through its greatest era of expansion. He had ordered the invasion of human space. He had celebrated each conquered world. He had believed that victory was inevitable. Now he looked like a creature who had seen his own death approaching. "We have lost contact with 47 military installations," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We have lost over 200 warships. Our supply lines to the Eastern campaign have been completely severed, and we still do not know what is attacking us." The chamber erupted in shouting. Representatives from each species demanded answers, accused each other of failure, called for action that no one could define. The delegate stood and announced that his species was withdrawing from the coalition. They would return to their home systems and defend their own territory. The alliance was broken. Tried to restore order, but his authority had been shattered along with his fleet. The meeting dissolved into chaos. In a private chamber away from the council, Admiral made his own preparations. He was the supreme commander of all Dominion military forces, a warrior who had never lost a battle in his long career. He had conquered 12 human worlds personally. He had killed thousands of their soldiers with his own hands. He was not afraid of ghosts or phantoms or whatever the soldiers were whispering about. He gathered his staff and issued his orders. Every available warship would be recalled from all theaters of operation. The invasion of Earth would be postponed. Defense of the homeland came first. They would assemble the largest fleet in the history of the Dominion, over 300 vessels, and they would sweep through the regions where the disappearances had occurred. They would find whatever was hunting them and destroy it. His officers obeyed without question. Within weeks, the Great Armada began to form. Intercepted the enemy communications and brought them to Captain Carter. She was the ship's intelligence officer, a small woman of 55 with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had served in military intelligence for 30 years before the war began. She knew how to read enemy intentions from scattered fragments of information. "They are gathering everything," she reported, handing Daniel a data pad with her analysis. 312 ships confirmed, possibly more joining from the outer territories. They are coming to find us. Daniel studied the information in silence. 300 ships. It was a force that could crush entire planetary systems. It was more firepower than humanity had possessed even before the war began. Against such numbers, they would be overwhelmed. He called a meeting of his senior staff. They gathered in the ship's war room, a circular chamber dominated by a holographic tactical display. The faces of his officers were illuminated by the soft blue light, showing the lines of exhaustion and the harder lines of determination. Brooks spoke first. "The Cascade array cannot fire continuously. It needs recovery time between shots. Against 300 ships, we would be exposed during those intervals. They would destroy us." Lisa Morgan nodded in agreement. "We have achieved more than anyone expected. The enemy coalition is fracturing. Their morale is shattered. We could retreat to human space and report our success. The mission could be considered complete." Cole pulled up tactical projections on the display. "If we engage them directly, our survival probability is less than 12%. The mathematics are clear." Pierce said nothing. She simply watched her captain waiting. Daniel looked at each of them in turn. These people had followed him into the darkness. They had trusted him with their lives. They had killed on his command without question. He owed them honesty. "You are right," he said quietly. "If we run, we survive. If we fight, we probably die. That is the truth." He paused, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke again, his voice was calm and certain. "But if we run, they learn that the phantom can be scared away. They rebuild their confidence. They resume the invasion of Earth. Everything we have done becomes meaningless. The war continues and humanity eventually loses." He stood and walked to the tactical display, looking at the projected positions of the enemy fleet. "If we fight, even if we die, we break them completely. We show them that no amount of force can protect them from human vengeance. We become something more than a ship. We become a legend that haunts them forever." He turned back to face his crew. "I will not order you to die with me. Anyone who wishes to leave can take the shuttle and return to Earth. There will be no shame in that choice." No one moved. No one spoke. They simply looked back at him with the same cold determination he felt in his own heart. Lisa Morgan broke the silence. "Where do we fight them?" Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "The nebula. The sensor interference will negate their numbers. We will make them come to us." Brooks nodded slowly. "I can push the engines harder than they were designed to go. We will have speed they cannot match." Pierce's eyes gleamed. "And I will make every shot count." The decision was made. They would not run. It would not hide. It would meet the entire armada and either destroy it or be destroyed trying. Daniel dismissed his officers to prepare for the coming battle. He remained alone in the war room, staring at the tactical display. 300 ships against one. The odds were impossible. But humanity had always excelled at doing the impossible. He thought of and one last time. Then he pushed the memories aside and began planning the battle that would decide the fate of the war. The nebula stretched across 3 light-years of space, a vast cloud of ionized gas and cosmic dust that glowed with soft purple and blue light. It was beautiful and dangerous. The electromagnetic interference inside the nebula rendered most sensors useless. Ships had to rely on visual contact and short-range detection to navigate its swirling depths. Admiral led his armada into the nebula with confidence. He had 312 warships under his command, the largest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled. His crews were veterans of countless battles. His weapons could glass entire planets. Whatever phantom had been hunting his people would die today. The fleet moved in standard hunting formation, spreading across a wide front to search as much territory as possible. Sat in his command chair on the bridge of his flagship, watching the nebula clouds drift past his officers reported nothing but empty space ahead. The waited above them. Daniel Carter had positioned his ship in the upper layers of the nebula, where the gas was thinner and the interference was strongest. The enemy fleet passed beneath him like fish swimming through dark water, unaware of the predator watching from above. He studied the formation, counting ships, identifying flagship positions, calculating angles of attack. His crew sat at their stations in perfect silence. Every system was ready. Every weapon was armed. "Target the flagship first," he ordered quietly. "If we kill their commander, the others will panic." Pierce locked her targeting systems onto Admiral's massive command ship. The Cascade array hummed with power, ready to unleash destruction. Daniel gave the command, "Begin." The dropped from the upper nebula like a falling star. The Cascade array fired, and its flagship dissolved into atoms. One moment it was there, a kilometer-long vessel bristling with weapons. The next moment it was gone, leaving only empty space behind. The fleet erupted into chaos, shifted targets with mechanical precision. The second ship vanished. The third. The fourth. The Cascade array sang its song of annihilation, and crews died without ever seeing their killer. But 300 ships was too many to destroy quickly. The array needed recovery time between shots, just as had warned. After the first 15 kills, had to wait 30 seconds before firing again. Those 30 seconds nearly ended everything. The captains, suddenly freed from their admiral's commands, reacted on instinct. They had seen the general direction of the attacks. They opened fire with everything they had, filling that region of space with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Cole threw into evasive maneuvers that should have been impossible. The ship twisted and rolled through the incoming fire, its engines screaming at the limits of their design. Brooks fed more power to the shields than they were rated to handle. The hull groaned under the stress. 3 missiles struck the forward section. The impact threw crew members from their stations. Damage alarms wailed throughout the ship, reported that they had lost 2 decks to decompression. But the Cascade array was ready again. Fired, more ships died. The survivors scattered, their formation completely broken. Some tried to flee the nebula entirely. Others charged toward in suicidal attacks, determined to destroy the Phantom even at the cost of their own lives. The battle became a nightmare of swirling gas, weapons fire, and dying ships. Daniel commanded his crew with cold efficiency, directing evasive maneuvers, coordinating damage control efforts, timing attacks for maximum effect. He had no time for fear or doubt. He existed only in the present moment, making decisions that meant life or death with every passing second. The hours passed in a blur of violence. Lisa Morgan coordinated the defensive systems, intercepting incoming missiles and jamming enemy targeting sensors. She had taken a wound to her shoulder during one of the impacts, but she refused to leave her station. blood soaked through her uniform, ignored in the heat of battle. Brooks performed miracles in the engineering section. Systems that had been destroyed were somehow restored. Power that should have been depleted was somehow regenerated. He pushed the ship beyond anything its designers had imagined, and somehow it held together. Pierce achieved a state of perfect focus that transcended ordinary consciousness. Her fingers moved across her console without conscious thought. She became one with the weapon, an extension of its terrible purpose. Ships died at her touch, one after another, until she lost count of how many she had killed. The fleet dwindled. 200 ships became 100, 100 became 50, 50 became 20. The survivors finally understood that they could not win this battle. They broke and ran, fleeing the nebula in desperate retreat. Destroyed 12 more before they escaped sensor range. Silence fell over the bridge of the... Daniel looked at the tactical display. 267 confirmed kills. The remaining ships were scattered across light years of space, running for their lives. The victory was total. But it had come at a cost that was crippled. The Cascade array had burned out during the final hour of fighting, its components fused beyond repair. The ship had taken 47 direct hits. 17 crew members were dead, their bodies recovered from sealed compartments throughout the vessel. The engines were barely functioning. They had enough power to limp home, but nothing more. Daniel stood slowly from his command chair. His body ached with exhaustion. His mind was numb with the weight of what they had done. Lisa approached him, her wounded arm hanging at her side. "Orders, Captain." He thought for a long moment before answering. "Send a message to Earth Command, 6 words only." He told her what to write. She transmitted it on their most powerful remaining communications array. The message reached Earth 14 hours later. It spread through the remaining human fleet, through the colony worlds that still held out, through the refugee camps on a dozen moons. 6 words that ignited hope where there had been only despair. The Dominion will not recover. Daniel Carter was right. Within 8 months, the coalition collapsed entirely. The had already withdrawn. The N turned on each other in civil war. The N retreated to their home systems and sealed their borders. The themselves descended into chaos as factions blamed each other for the disaster. The conquered human worlds began to revolt. Resistance movements that had been hiding in shadows suddenly found themselves facing demoralized occupation forces with no hope of reinforcement. Colony after colony was liberated. The tide of war reversed completely. The USS returned to Titan as a broken vessel crewed by exhausted survivors. The ship was too damaged to ever fly again. It was converted into a memorial, preserved exactly as it had been at the end of the battle. Visitors could walk its corridors and see the scorch marks on the walls, the blood stains that had never been cleaned, the stations where heroes had fought and died. Captain Daniel Carter retired from military service. He lived quietly on Earth for another 20 years, rarely speaking publicly about what he and his crew had done. When he died, he was buried beside his wife and son on New Geneva, which had been rebuilt from the ashes of destruction. His epitaph contained only 2 lines. He avenged the fallen, he saved the living. The legend of the lived on for centuries. It became a story that human children learned before they could read. It became a warning that kept potential enemies at bay. It became proof that humanity would never surrender, would never accept defeat, would always find a way to fight back. Some wars are won by numbers. Some are won by strategy. Some are won by technology. This war was won by 400 humans who had lost everything and refused to accept extinction. The USS had entered the war, and nothing had survived its wrath. The Phantom continued to hunt.